At 4:47 in the morning on October 17th, 1944, Marie-Louise Colden walked toward a German checkpoint outside Stalag 7B labor camp in occupied Belgium, carrying a wicker laundry basket. The autumn air bit at her cheeks, cold enough to see her breath. Inside the basket, beneath a layer of folded linens that smelled of lye soap, lay 20 sets of forged transfer documents. Behind her, hidden in a barn 300 yards back, 20 Allied prisoners of war sat in darkness, starving, terrified, waiting for a woman they'd never met to either save their lives or get them killed. The guards ahead, for Wehrmacht soldiers with Mauser rifles and orders to shoot escapees on sight, stood between her and the most audacious rescue attempt of the war. Marie-Louise had no weapon, no radio, no backup team waiting in the woods, just a maid's uniform, papers that would crumble under serious scrutiny, and a plan that every male resistance operative in her cell had called suicide. She was 28 years old. In the next 18 hours, she would lead 20 men through 4 German checkpoints, across 2 minefields, past an SS inspection point, and over a guarded bridge into Allied territory. The German High Command would later call impossible. The men she saved would call a miracle. But in that moment, walking toward guards who'd waved her through 100 times before, Marie-Louise Colden was just a maid carrying laundry, invisible in a way that women doing menial work have always been invisible to men with guns and power. Her hands didn't shake as she approached the gate. They couldn't. Shaking hands would kill 20 men. Marie-Louise Colden was born in 1916 in Liège, Belgium, to a Flemish seamstress and a British railway engineer who'd stayed in Belgium after the Great War. She grew up speaking 4 languages at the kitchen table: French with her mother, English with her father, Flemish with the neighbors, and German with the shopkeepers in the mixed border town, where languages blended like watercolors. By the time she was 16, she could switch between the mid-sentence without thinking, her accent adapting like a chameleon skin. She was smart, the kind of smart that made teachers tell her parents she should go to university, but there was no money for that. At 18, she took a job as a chambermaid at the Hotel Metropole in Brussels. She was good at it. More importantly, she was good at being invisible. Guests would have entire conversations in front of her, as if she were a piece of furniture. Businessmen, politicians. After a while, she realized that being a maid was like being a ghost. You saw everything, heard everything, and nobody ever remembered you were there. When the Germans invaded Belgium in May 1940, Marie-Louise was 24 years old. The hotel became a billet for Wehrmacht officers. She kept working. She smiled politely. She changed their sheets and emptied their ashtrays and listened to them complain about the war, about the cold, about missing their families. She memorized everything. Which officers drank too much, which ones were cruel, which ones were just tired boys in uniforms they hadn't asked for. In 1942, a resistance operative approached her in a market, a man named Claude who'd noticed she worked in the hotel. He asked if she'd be willing to pass along information. She said yes before he finished the question. For 18 months, Marie-Louise Colden fed intelligence to the Belgian resistance, guard rotations, officer movements, overheard conversations about troop deployments. She was careful. She was patient. She never took unnecessary risks. And she was never caught because nobody suspects the maid. The male operatives in her cell appreciated the information, but they never quite took her seriously. Good work, Marie. They'd say, the way you praise a child for a decent drawing. When she proposed joining a sabotage operation, Claude laughed. Too dangerous for a woman. You're more valuable doing what you're doing. She didn't argue. She just kept listening, kept memorizing, kept being invisible. In September 1944, as Allied forces pushed through France, the resistance received intelligence from a sympathetic Belgian guard. 20 Allied prisoners of war, mostly airmen shot down over Belgium and France, were being held at a forced labor camp outside Namur. They were scheduled for transfer to Stalag Luft III in Germany on October 18th. Once they reached that camp, deep in the Reich, they'd be beyond rescue. The resistance cell met in the basement of a butcher shop to plan. 8 men, including Claude, sat around a table covered with hand-drawn maps. The consensus was clear. An armed raid hit the transport convoy on the road, overwhelm the guards, extract the prisoners. It would require at least 15 armed men, probably result in casualties, and would bring Gestapo reprisals down on the entire region. Marie Louise, standing in the corner because there weren't enough chairs, said quietly, "I can walk them out." The room went silent. Then someone laughed. Claude turned to her with the patient expression of a teacher correcting a slow student. "Marie, this isn't like passing a note. This is 20 men, armed guards, checkpoints." "I know," she said. "That's why an armed raid won't work. You'll have to fight through 4 checkpoints, and the moment you fire the first shot, every German garrison within 10 miles will converge on you. But I can get inside the camp. I can get them papers. I can walk them through the checkpoints, because guards don't look twice at a maid with workers." "You're not a soldier," another man said, not unkindly. "You're a hotel maid." "Exactly," Marie Louise said. "That's why it'll work." They debated for an hour. The plan was insane. The risk was enormous. But the armed raid was nearly as risky and would definitely result in civilian reprisals. Finally, Claude made a decision. "You have 1 week to prove you can get inside that camp. If you can do that, we'll consider your plan." Marie Louise got inside in 3 days. The labor camp outside Namur was a converted factory surrounded by barbed wire and guard towers. It held about 200 prisoners, forced laborers, political prisoners, and a small group of Allied POWs kept separate from the others. The commandant, a Wehrmacht Hauptmann named Dietrich Vogel, was a bureaucrat, not a soldier. He cared about paperwork, efficiency, and avoiding trouble. His office needed cleaning. Marie Louise, using forged credentials provided by the resistance, applied for a job as a maid. She was hired the same day. The pay was terrible. The work was demeaning, and it gave her access to everything. For 2 weeks, she cleaned Hauptmann Vogel's office every morning at 6. She dusted his desk, emptied his wastebasket, polished the windows. She memorized the layout of every document on his desk. She noted which forms required his signature, which ones were rubber-stamped by clerks. She learned that the guards changed shifts at 6 in the morning and 6 in the evening, and that during the shift change, there was a 7-minute window when the gate was staffed by only 2 men instead of 4. She befriended a German cook named Hilda, who hated the war and missed her sons. She learned which guards were diligent and which ones were lazy, which ones checked papers carefully, and which ones just waved people through. The Allied prisoners were kept in a separate barracks, guarded more heavily than the rest. Marie Louise couldn't approach them directly without raising suspicion, but she could watch. She noted their routines. She saw them march to the work site every morning, saw them return exhausted every evening. She saw the way the guards treated them, not with cruelty, but with indifference, the way you treat livestock. One of them, a tall American with a pilot's swagger even in prison rags, caught her eye once as she walked past carrying a bucket. He looked at her with the hollow suspicion of a man who'd learned not to trust anything. She looked away quickly. Too much eye contact would be remembered. On October 3rd, she slipped a note into the American pilot's jacket pocket as she walked past the work detail. It took her 3 tries over 3 days to get close enough without being noticed. The note, written in English on a scrap of paper no bigger than a postage stamp, said, "October 17th, 4:30 a.m. Be ready. Trust the maid." She had no way of knowing if he'd found it, if he believed it, or if he'd reported it to the guards as a Gestapo test. She just had a hope. The hardest part wasn't getting inside the camp. It was the papers. To walk 20 men out of guarded facility in occupied territory, Marie Louise needed documents that would survive scrutiny at multiple checkpoints. She needed transfer orders, signed by Hauptmann Vogel, authorizing the movement of 20 prisoners to a labor assignment in Liège. The resistance had a forger, a man named Anton who could replicate almost any document. But when Marie Louise explained what she needed, he stared at her like she'd asked him to forge a letter from Hitler himself. 20 sets of transfer papers. Anton said, his voice rising, "Do you understand what you're asking? 1 mistake, 1 smudge signature, 1 wrong stamp, and they'll shoot all of you, and then they'll find me and shoot me." "I know," Marie Louise said. "That's why they have to be perfect. I don't have the blank forms." I don't have Vogel's signature exemplar. I don't even have the right kind of paper. This is impossible. Marie-Louise didn't argue. She just said, "How long would it take if you had everything you needed?" Anton thought for a moment. 2 weeks. Maybe 3. And that's if nothing goes wrong. "I'll get you what you need," Marie-Louise said. Stealing blank transfer forms from Hauptmann Vogel's office was like defusing a bomb in slow motion. The forms were kept in a locked drawer in his desk. Marie-Louise didn't have a key. She didn't know how to pick locks. But she noticed that every Thursday, Vogel left his office for 2 hours to attend a meeting with the regional commandant. And she noticed that he was careless with his keys, often leaving them on his desk while he used the lavatory down the hall. On the 3rd Thursday of September, while Vogel was in the lavatory, Marie-Louise unlocked the drawer, removed 3 blank forms from the middle of a stack of 50, and relocked the drawer. Her hand shook so badly she nearly dropped the keys. The entire theft took 45 seconds. If Vogel had returned 30 seconds earlier, she'd have been caught. He didn't. He came back, picked up his keys without looking at them, and left for his meeting. Marie-Louise finished cleaning his office, walked calmly to the supply closet, and vomited into a mop bucket. Getting Vogel's signature was easier. She didn't need to steal anything, just trace it. Over the course of a week, she collected requisition forms and duty rosters from Vogel's wastebasket, documents he'd signed and discarded. She practiced tracing his signature on scrap paper, over and over, until her hand could replicate the specific loops and pressure of his pen. Anton taught her how to age the documents. Tea stains to yellow the paper, cigarette ash rubbed into the fibers to simulate handling, a specific type of blue ink that matched Wehrmacht's standard issue. Each document took 4 hours to complete. Marie-Louise worked in the cellar of a safe house, by candlelight, her hand cramping after the first hour. She worked every night for 19 days. On October 15th, 2 days before the escape, she finished the 20th set of papers. Anton inspected them under a magnifying glass and said, "If I didn't know better, I'd swear Vogel signed these himself." Then he looked at her and said, "You know this is insane, right? Even with perfect papers, the odds of getting 20 men through 4 checkpoints are almost 0. "I know," Marie-Louise said, "but almost 0 isn't 0. The prisoners didn't trust her. Why would they? They'd been betrayed before by collaborators, by false promises, by their own desperate hope. When Marie-Louise finally made contact with them on October 14th, slipping into their barracks during a shift change with the help of a bribe guard, the reception was hostile. 20 men, gaunt and exhausted, stared at her like she was a Gestapo trick. The American pilot, whose name was Captain James Harker, spoke first. "Who the hell are you?" "My name is Marie-Louise," she said in English. "I'm with the Belgian resistance. I'm getting you out of here in 3 days." Silence. Then a British sergeant, a man with a scar across his cheek and eyes that had seen too much, laughed bitterly. "Right. And I'm Winston Churchill. This is a setup. They're testing us to see who's stupid enough to try to escape." Marie-Louise had expected this. She reached into her coat and pulled out a piece of paper, a BBC radio transcript from October 12th, 2 days ago, detailing Allied advances in the Netherlands. It was information the prisoners couldn't possibly have. "I have contact with the outside," she said. "I have forged papers for all of you. I have a route planned through 4 checkpoints to Allied lines. I can't guarantee you'll survive. But your transfer to Germany is scheduled for October 18th. If you go to that camp, 70% of you won't come home. I'm offering you a chance." The men looked at each other. Captain Harker studied her face, looking for the lie. "Why?" he finally asked. "Why risk your life for us?" "Because I can," Marie-Louise said simply. "Because you need someone, and because nobody suspects a Maid." One by one, the men agreed, some out of desperation, some out of hope, some because staying meant certain death, and at least this was a chance. The last holdout was a cynical American bombardier from Brooklyn named Eddie Kowalski, who'd survived 2 years in 3 different camps and trusted nothing. He looked at Marie-Louise for a long time, then finally said, "All right, ma'am, we'll follow the Maid. But if this is a trap, I'm haunting you in the afterlife." "Fair enough," Marie-Louise said. On October 16th, the day before the escape, Marie-Louise walked the route one final time. 12 miles from the camp to the Allied lines near Dinant. 4 German checkpoints. 2 known minefields flanking the main road. 1 bridge over the Meuse River, guarded by SS. She timed every segment with a stolen watch. Checkpoint 1 to checkpoint 2, 43 minutes at a normal walking pace. Checkpoint 2 to checkpoint 3, 1 hour and 17 minutes. She had supplies along the route. Civilian coats in a ditch, food and water in a hollow tree, medical supplies in an abandoned barn. She bribed a Belgian farmer with her last bit of money to leave his barn unlocked. She memorized the challenge and response passwords the guards would use, information she'd overheard from a drunken Wehrmacht corporal at the hotel. Every detail mattered. Every minute counted. One mistake would kill them all. That night, she couldn't sleep. She sat in a church in Namur, the same church where she'd been baptized 28 years ago, and wrote a letter to her mother. She didn't explain what she was about to do. She didn't want her mother to know, didn't want her to carry that fear. She just wrote, Man, I love you. Whatever happens, know that I did something that mattered. I was not invisible. I was not small. I mattered. She sealed the letter and gave it to Claude with instructions to deliver it only if she didn't return. Then she walked back to her room, laid down on her bed fully clothed, and stared at the ceiling until dawn. At 4:30 in the morning on October 17th, 1944, Marie-Louise Colden entered Stalig's 7B labor camp for the last time. The guards at the gate knew her by sight. They nodded as she passed. Just a maid, arriving early as always. She walked directly to the Allied prisoners' barracks. The bribe guard let her in without a word. 20 men stood waiting in the darkness, silent, tense. She could smell their fear. It smelled like sweat and metal and desperation. She distributed the forged papers, one set to each man, along with civilian coats that would cover their prison uniforms. Then she gave them the only instruction that mattered. You are Belgian laborers being transferred to a munitions factory in Liège. You speak only if spoken to. You do not run. You do not fight. If anyone panics, we all die. Do you understand? 20 heads nodded. Captain Harker, standing at the front, met her eyes. We're ready, ma'am. Then let's go, Marie-Louise said. At 4:47 a.m., she walked to the main gate with 20 men behind her, arranged in 2 columns like a work detail. Her heart hammered, so hard she thought the guards would hear it. The gate guard, a middle-aged Wehrmacht private named Klaus who always complained about his back, checked her identification. Then he looked at the transfer documents. Then he looked at the 20 men. His eyes narrowed. This is a lot of workers for one supervisor. Marie-Louise smiled, the same polite, slightly weary smile she perfected over years of service work. German efficiency, yes? They want the factory operational by Monday. Apparently one woman can supervise 20 men if she's stern enough. She said it in German, with just a hint of exasperation, the universal tone of a worker complaining about management. Klaus chuckled. Good luck with that. He waved them through. They walked through the gate, past the guard towers, past the barbed wire, onto the road that led west toward Liège and freedom. Marie-Louise didn't look back. Looking back would show doubt. Doubt would kill them. She just walked, steady and calm, like a woman escorting workers to a job site. Nothing unusual, nothing worth remembering. Behind her, 20 men who'd been prisoners 5 minutes ago walked in silence, barely breathing, waiting for the shout or the gunshot that would mean it was over. The shout never came. After 200 yards, Captain Harker whispered, Holy hell, we're out. We're not out, Marie-Louise said quietly. We're just past the first gate. 3 more checkpoints. Stay quiet. Stay calm. The first checkpoint was at the edge of Namur, a simple roadblock manned by 2 bored Wehrmacht soldiers checking papers for black market smugglers. They glanced at Marie-Louise's documents, glanced at the men, waved them through without a word. 1 checkpoint down. 3 to go. The second checkpoint was different. It was 6:12 in the morning, and the sun was starting to rise, which meant better visibility, which meant more scrutiny. A young Wehrmacht lieutenant, fresh-faced and eager, studied the transfer papers with the intensity of someone trying to prove himself. He asked questions in German. Where exactly was the factory? What was the production quota? Who authorized the transfer? Marie-Louise answered each question with bureaucratic precision, citing fake project numbers and fictional supervisors with the confidence of someone who memorized every detail. The lieutenant seemed satisfied. Then he turned to the men and asked in German, "Any of you speak German?" One of the prisoners, a Texan pilot named Billy Crawford, who didn't speak a word German, didn't understand the question. He started to turn toward Captain Harker for translation. In that half-second, Marie-Louise saw the lieutenant's expression change, saw suspicion flicker across his face. She coughed loudly, a harsh, wet cough that made everyone turn toward her. She stepped between the lieutenant and Crawford, still coughing, and said in rapid German, "Excuse me, sorry. This cold won't quit. These workers, they're Flemish. Most of them don't speak German, only French and Flemish. Lazy, half of them. I spend more time translating than supervising." She kept talking, complaining about impossible quotas and incompetent management, and the cold that wouldn't go away, filling the air with words, drowning out the moment of suspicion. The lieutenant's expression softened. He laughed sympathetically. "I understand. My men are the same. Good luck with your factory." He waved them on. They walked for another hour. The sun climbed higher. The road stretched ahead, empty and exposed. Every vehicle that passed made Marie-Louise's stomach clench. Every distant figure could be a patrol. At 7:40 a.m., they reached the third checkpoint, a more substantial installation with 6 guards and a barrier across the road. An SS Unterscharfer, a sergeant with cold eyes and a scar on his jaw, checked their papers. He looked at the men, looked back at the papers. Then his eyes locked onto one of the prisoners, a British commando named Lieutenant Peter Ashford. Recognition flashed across the SS sergeant's face. Marie-Louise saw it instantly. Ashford had been paroled on a rail depot 6 months ago. His face had been on wanted posters. The sergeant knew him. The sergeant's hand moved toward his holster. Marie-Louise had maybe 3 seconds before he sounded the alarm. She didn't think. She just acted. She stepped forward, directly into the sergeant's line of sight, and spoke in German with a tone of icy, bureaucratic authority that she'd heard 1,000 times from German officers berating subordinates. "These men are assigned to Oberkommando, West Priority Project 17B. If you delay this transfer, I will personally report your name to Standard & Feuerkoch for obstruction of critical war production. Do you understand?" It was a complete bluff. There was no Priority Project 17B. There was no Standard & Feuerkoch. But Marie-Louise said it with such absolute conviction, such cold certainty, that the sergeant hesitated. He looked at the papers again. Looked at her. She held his gaze, didn't blink, didn't waver. 30 seconds passed. The longest 30 seconds of her life. Behind her, Lieutenant Ashford stood frozen, waiting to die. Finally, the SS sergeant stepped aside. "Proceed," he said, his voice tight. They walked past the barrier, past the guards, onto the road beyond. Marie-Louise's legs felt like water. She wanted to collapse, to vomit, to scream. She kept walking. After half a mile, Captain Harker whispered, "How did you do that?" "I have no idea," Marie-Louise said honestly. 2 miles later, they reached the final obstacle, the bridge over the Meuse River. It was guarded by 12 Wehrmacht soldiers and an MG-42 machine gun nest. There was no way to bluff past 12 guards. Marie-Louise had known this from the beginning. The bridge was the breaking point, the place where the plan would either work or fail catastrophically. She gathered the men in a grove of trees a quarter-mile from the bridge and explained the new plan. "I can't get all of you across that bridge. There are too many guards, and they'll radio ahead to verify if they see 20 men. So we split up. 10 of you come with me across the bridge using the papers. The other 10 cross the river a mile downstream after dark. It's shallow there, maybe 4 feet deep. Cold, but survivable. And if the second group gets caught?" Eddie Kowalski asked. "Then they get caught," Marie-Louise said. "But at least 10 of you will be free." The men drew straws. Captain Harker, Lieutenant Ashford, Eddie Kowalski, and 7 others would cross with Marie-Louise. The remaining 10, led by a Canadian navigator named Flight Lieutenant Thomas Reed, would cross the river after sunset. They synchronized watches. The river group would cross at 2200 hours, 11 p.m. If they didn't make it, the bridge group wouldn't know. They'd just have to hope. At 3 p.m., Marie-Louise and her group of 10 approached the bridge. A Hauptmann, a captain with graying hair and a weary expression, stopped them at the checkpoint. He examined the papers. Then he did exactly what Marie-Louise had feared. He picked up a field telephone and said, "I need to verify a transfer authorization." He gave the operator the project number from the forged documents. Marie-Louise's heart stopped. There was nothing to verify. The project didn't exist. In 30 seconds, maybe less, the operator would report that there was no such authorization, and 12 soldiers would open fire. She couldn't run, couldn't fight. She just stood there, watching the Hauptmann hold the phone to his ear, watching him wait for the response that would kill them all. The phone crackled. Static. More static. The Hauptmann frowned, shook the receiver. "Hello? Operator." More static. Then a voice, distant and broken. "Line is down." "Repeat. Line is down." Maintenance crew dispatched. The Hauptmann sighed, hung up the phone, and waved them through. "Go on. I don't have time for this." They crossed the bridge. Marie-Louise didn't breathe until they were on the other side. Captain Harker, walking beside her, whispered, "That was the luckiest thing I've ever seen." "Luck or God," Marie-Louise said. "I don't care which." They walked for another 3 hours, following back roads and farm paths, avoiding main routes. At 1800 hours, 6 p.m., they reached a safe house, a farmhouse owned by a resistance sympathizer. The farmer's wife fed them bread and soup, the first real food some men had eaten in months. They rested for 2 hours. Then, at 2000 hours, 8 p.m., they continued west. By 2230, 10:30 p.m., they reached the edge of Allied-controlled territory. American sentries challenged them. Captain Harker identified himself, gave his rank and serial number. The sentries radioed back to command. 30 minutes later, an American intelligence officer arrived, verified their identities, and welcomed them back. 10 men, free. Marie-Louise stood apart, watching them celebrate, watching them cry, watching them become human again. Captain Harker walked over to her. "What about the others? The river group?" "I don't know," Marie-Louise said. "We wait." They waited. Midnight passed. 1 a.m., 2 a.m., at 0237. 2:37 in the morning on October 18th. 9 men stumbled into the American lines, soaking wet, shivering, exhausted. Flight Lieutenant Thomas Reed reported that they'd crossed the river successfully. One man, a Canadian navigator named Officer Robert Mackenzie, had been swept away by the current. They'd tried to save him. They couldn't. 19 men made it. One didn't. Marie-Louise sat down in the mud and sobbed. She'd saved 19 lives. She'd lost one. Captain Harker sat beside her and said, "You gave him a chance. That's more than he had yesterday." "It's not enough," Marie-Louise said. "It's everything," Harker said. The 19 men Marie-Louise Cole then saved filed detailed reports with Allied intelligence. They described the escape, the forged papers, the checkpoints, the impossible bluff at the SS post. Most of them didn't know her full name. The reports referred to her as a Belgian resistance operative or a female agent. The OSS classified the reports and filed them away. After the war, Marie-Louise returned to Belgium. She didn't seek recognition. She didn't tell her story. She went back to work, this time as a secretary in a textile company. In 1947, she married a schoolteacher named Jean Moreau. They had 3 children. She lived a quiet life. When her children asked about the war, she said, "I did what I could. Many people did more." In 1983, a military historian named Dr. Robert Hastings was researching POW escape stories for a book. He found a declassified OSS file that mentioned a Belgian woman who'd walked 20 prisoners through Nazi lines. The file included a name, Marie-Louise Cole. Dr. Hastings tracked her down to a small town outside Liège. She was 67 years old, working part-time in a library. When he asked for an interview, she was reluctant. "It was a long time ago," she said. "I'm not sure I remember everything." But she agreed. They sat in her kitchen, and she told him the story. Not the heroic version. The real version. The fear. The doubt. The moment at the SS checkpoint when she thought they'd all die. The Canadian navigator who drowned. When Dr. Hastings asked why she'd risked her life, she said, "Because I could. Because they needed someone. Because being a maid meant I was invisible. And sometimes invisible people can do impossible things." Dr. Hastings asked if she'd ever been recognized for what she did. She shook her head. "I didn't do it for recognition. I did it because it needed to be done." He asked if she regretted anything. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "I regret that I couldn't save all 20. I think about Robert Mackenzie sometimes. I wonder if his family knows how hard he fought to get home." Marie Louise Cole then died on March 14, 1989, at the age of 73. Her obituary in the local paper mentioned that she was a retired secretary, a devoted mother and grandmother, and a member of the church choir. It didn't mention the war. It didn't mention the 19 men. But word spread. Captain James Harker, retired and living in Texas, saw the obituary reprinted in a veteran's newsletter. He made phone calls. He tracked down the other survivors. 11 of them were still alive. They flew to Belgium for the funeral. Marie Louise's children were confused. "Who are these men?" her daughter asked. Captain Harker, now 70 years old, took her hand and said, "Your mother never told you, did she? She saved our lives. She walked us through hell in a maid's uniform. She's the bravest person I've ever met." The men told stories about the forged papers, about the SS checkpoint, about the way she'd stood between them and death with nothing but words and will, about how she cried when they told her one man didn't make it. Marie Louise's children listened in shock. "She never said anything," her son whispered. "She never told us." "She wouldn't," Eddie Kowalski said. "That's who she was. She didn't do it for the story. She did it because it was right." In 1991, 2 years after her death, the Belgian government awarded Marie Louise Cole a posthumous Medal for Valor. Her family accepted it on her behalf. In 1994, the town of Namur erected a small plaque in the square near where the old labor camp used to stand. It reads, "Marie Louise Cole, 1916 to 1989. She saved 19 lives. She never asked for recognition. We remember anyway." Captain James Harker died in 2003. In his will, he left a letter to be published. It said, "I've been asked many times who the bravest person I met in the war was. People expect me to name a general or Medal of Honor recipient. But the answer is a Belgian maid who walked 20 terrified men through enemy lines with nothing but forged papers and absolute courage. Her name was Marie Louise Cole. She was 28 years old. She was invisible to the men with guns and power, and that invisibility saved our lives. I owe her everything. We all do. Today, if you visit the Military Museum in Brussels, there's a small exhibit about resistance operations in occupied Belgium. In one corner, there's a photograph of Marie Louise Cole, taken sometime in the 1950s. She's smiling, standing in a garden, holding a grandchild. The caption reads, "Marie Louise Cole, resistance operative. In October 1944, she led 19 Allied prisoners of war to freedom through German-occupied territory. She used forged papers, a maid's uniform, and extraordinary courage. She never sought recognition. She said she was just doing what needed to be done. The men she saved knew better. They knew that what she did wasn't just brave. It was impossible. And she did it anyway, because sometimes the most powerful weapon isn't a gun or a bomb. Sometimes it's being underestimated. Sometimes it's being invisible. Sometimes it's being a woman in a maid's uniform who everyone assumes is harmless, right up until the moment she does something that changes everything." Marie Louise Cole then proved that heroism doesn't always wear uniform or carry a rifle. Sometimes it carries a laundry basket and forged papers. Sometimes it walks calmly past guards who don't see it as a threat. Sometimes it's quiet and invisible and absolutely unstoppable. The 19 men who walked to freedom behind her understood something that the world is still learning. Courage isn't about being seen. It's about doing what's right, even when no one's watching, even when no one will remember, even when the only reward is knowing that you mattered. She mattered. She saved 19 lives. She changed the course of 20 families. She proved that a maid could outsmart the Wehrmacht, outbluff the SS, and lead men through impossible odds of freedom. And then she went home, raised her children, worked in a library, and never asked for applause. Because that's what real heroes do. They don't do it for the story. They do it because someone has to. They do it because they can. They do it because 19 men deserved a chance to go home. Marie Louise Cole then gave them that chance. And in doing so, she became something the German army never expected and could never stop. A woman who refused to be invisible when it mattered most.